Welcome to the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry channel. I'm Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH, Scottish Rite Freemason. Before you do anything else, make sure you hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, share the video, especially this is going to be a really great one. If you're a Mason, you're going to love this. If you're into history, you're going to love this. And please also drop us a comment below. Masons, D-Malay, Rainbow. I got in trouble for not mentioning the Cedars. So to all Cedars,
nice.
Eastern Star. If you are part of a Masonic group, we'd
Yes.
love to hear from you. Drop that information below so we can give you a shout out in the future. Brother Chris Ruli, 32nd degree KCCH, historian, Freemason, and now author. First of all, I'm so happy and so proud of you, dude. I know how hard you have worked on this, and this is really exciting. It's more than this. But Chris has published
notes, the Spark notes.
Yeah, this is the notes for the dumb interviewer, so it makes it look like I've had a chance to read it. I've not read it yet because
it's not out
yet, but it's very exciting. Chris Ruli, author. Give us the spiel on the book. Give us your book pitch, bro.
Book pitch, man. 5 years ago, I started working on this book because there was no definitive book on the Freemasons and the Presidency of the United States. There were books on George Washington. There were books on Truman. There were books on certain presidents. And in fact, there were even a couple books that were similar to this where someone put the story together and said, well, here's what we have. Here are the 5 or 6 paragraphs of information on the presidents. What they didn't do, and what no one did, was I actually went through presidential libraries. I went through every single presidential library. I went through every single letter of correspondence. I went through newspapers. I went through diaries. I went through anything I can find and took half of it and said, okay, this is BS because this is hearsay, conjecture, whatever. And then the rest of it came into this book that was about, I want to say 70 to 80,000 words.
Wow.
I submitted it to the publisher. The publisher said, this is great, cut it in half because no one's going to read a 2-volume as anyone does.
See, I would disagree. I think you got to do the director's cut at some point.
That's right. Kingdom of Heaven director's cut is better than the original theatrical cut. I'll tell you that.
Zack Snyder's Justice League, bro.
Yeah, release the Ruli cut. All right. Anyway,
we digress, as we often do.
Anyway, so the idea with the book was scholarly focus. I don't want any hearsay. I want what actually happened. But also, in going through this, I found a lot of interesting gems of Masonic activities, things that were never published in Masonic papers before, which I'm really proud of. I mean, stuff like, Abraham Lincoln receiving a Knights Templar escort to an event in D.C. All the activities associated with, First Ladies, that's never covered in any Masonic journal.
Yeah, were any of them Eastern Star members? Right?
Exactly. Not just that, but they participated in Masonic activities as First Ladies. I mean, how many of those activities have you seen?
Yeah, when Washington was down in the pit laying the cornerstone, where was Martha? She had to be nearby.
Well, okay, yeah. So it starts, and by the way, it does start with George Washington, and we go chronologically all the way to, we actually end with Bush Jr., so George W. Bush.
I've got to ask you a couple questions about your research. Was there something that you found about a particular president that was surprising, or was there an event that was just the most eye-opening for you in terms of the crossover between Freemasonry and the U.S. presidency?
I think the one thing that really got me was, it's not one specific event, but it was a series of presidents that you wouldn't expect. So Calvin Coolidge, for example, he lost his son during the presidency. And he was relatively quiet. He didn't really speak. It was, the silent Cal, right? And so he didn't really do a lot of activities outside the White House. He didn't really spend a little time out of the White House. But every year, he attended Masonic religious services. They were non-denominational services. Mm-hmm. Herbert Hoover, participated in Masonic events. I guess one of the things that I really like to talk about is Ulysses S. Grant, not a Freemason. His dad was a Freemason. His dad actually helped charter a lodge back home, but he never joined the fraternity. Well, when he's in D.C., he is attending. I found so many, I had to sit there and go, wait a minute, am I double counting the 20 or 30 Masonic activities I found for Ulysses S. Grant? And many of those were associated to the Knights Templar, many associated with activities that were happening at the White House, right? So for example, from Ulysses S. Grant all the way to Herbert Hoover, regularly Knights Templar marched on the White House. It was an annual inspection ceremony. So they lined up, they marched to the White House, they opened the White House gates, they went through, and whoever the president was at the time would stand at the balcony or the north portico and salute the brethren as they came by. And it was part of a thing that happened in Washington. It was a tradition that would happen in Washington. And so Washington, D.C. becomes a major player. So I think that's probably the most significant, where we always have this connection to the presidents. We always have this connection, oh, there are 14 or 15 Masonic presidents, and they did all these activities. But no one ever said, well, what are those activities? No one actually wrote them down. Here, I gave you about 453 Masonic interactions, and that's just in D.C. My publisher said, take all this non-D.C. stuff out, because if you need, you're literally going to do 2 books.
Right. The question has to come up, and I've done videos on the number of guys that signed the Declaration of Independence that were Masons,
Sure.
the number on the
Less than
Constitution. And so many people think it's like, oh, there's so many, the whole Constitution, the
No
whole
way.
Declaration. And it was just not true. Of our 46 presidents that we've had, how many that we know of can you say for certain were Freemasons?
The number depends.
Okay, fair.
But it depends
That's
on-
fair.
Yes, but it depends on your interpretation of what is a Mason. And that's a weird way to start it, but here's the thing. There are 14 Master Masons. There are 14 that we know that went through, entered apprentice to Master Mason degree. Lyndon B. Johnson, do you consider Lyndon B. Johnson a Mason? If you were an entered apprentice Mason, and this is for the folks on the video as well, you became an entered apprentice Mason, and unfortunately, you hate to hear it, you die. Do you receive
Things
a Masonic
happen.
funeral? Are
That-
you considered a Mason?
It depends. It depends. If you die and your family came to me as the master of a lodge and said, would you do the funeral rites? I would absolutely do it as long as the Grand Lodge allowed it. And your mileage may vary. Grand Lodges
And it
have
depends on
different
the
rules
Grand Lodge. I understand that.
If you were a guy who joined the craft and then walked away for whatever reason, you didn't do your catechism or something of that nature, you just decided, you know what, and I can understand that. There are people that come in, they become entered apprentices, and they go, you know what, this just isn't for me. I'm going to go another way. Understandable.
That's mostly what Lyndon B. Johnson did.
Then I say no, he was not a Mason.
Okay. So if you were
But
to count
definitely an
Johnson,
asterisk. Definitely an asterisk.
absolutely. And by the way, included in the book, the whole story about what happened is included in the book. By the way, there were also 2 or 3 other presidential administrations that had some weird, quirky. So for example, Warren G. Harding was blackballed for a fellow craft.
Really?
He became an entered apprentice Mason. He was blackballed to move forward for a fellow craft. Harding then leaves, he's not, okay, great, thanks. Goes on, continues his political career. He is nominated the presidential nominee for the Republican Party in that year. The lodge comes back and says, whoever the person was, it got resolved. They bring him back, and during the campaign, he is brought back and receives the fellowcraft and the Master Mason degree.
Huh.
Teddy Roosevelt does not become a Mason until after the election, right? So he is elected vice president. He is interested in joins Freemasonry. Taft, right? William Howard Taft does not become a Freemason until after his election to president, and he's elected on site. Taft, in doing my research, Taft was the first president I can find that had an issue with the Secret Service. So you remember, we have this thing about
Right.
Truman where, Truman said to a Secret Service agent, I'm safer in the lodge room than I am
out here.
outside. Right. Well, Taft becomes a Master Mason the next meeting or the first meeting he attends after his initiation. Well, he gets there, the Secret Service weren't allowed to enter the room because none of them were Master Masons. He didn't think about it. In the newspaper clipping, it sort of says something like, while the president was allowed to enter, the Secret Service were allowed to,
Because that would not happen in today's
I mean,
world.
that is probably the best Tyler in the universe, who was just like, no,
Yeah,
you
sorry.
are not a Mason.
I do not see that happening today.
I know your job is
Right.
Secret Service, right, but no, you are not allowed to enter.
Looking over all of these, there are certain names where we hear them included on lists of Masonic presidents and we know that they are not. And one that jumps to mind immediately, you mentioned one already, but I'll start with the first one, Thomas Jefferson.
Yes.
Family connections to Masonry.
Okay.
I've heard his family, he's had, his dad or his brothers or
Sure.
something like that were Masons.
Okay.
Jefferson, not a Mason though.
Doesn't make him a Mason just because his family. Yeah.
He appears in the minutes of a public or a
Right.
dinner that
That's
they
right.
had.
It was
and
a
so
cornerstone laying ceremony.
Right. And
for
people say, oh, he's a Mason. Not a Mason.
So here's what happened. There was an article. Actually, there was a series of articles in the New Age magazine for the Scottish Rite. William Boyden, who's the librarian at the time, was fascinated and slightly obsessed with Thomas Jefferson.
I can understand it.
So he compiles 120. It's sort of like what I did with this book. He compiles 120. He goes through all the periodicals and any research that was done by Masons, because the House of the Temple Library, you have access to all that research. And so he publishes this article in the New Age that basically, like, is Thomas Jefferson a Freemason? Here are all the references to Jefferson. The problem with it is he is listing, and he even mentions it, this is all hearsay. Here it's listed that he attended a lodge. There's no record of it. Here he is attended to have written a letter to a Mason. There's no record of it. So are all these references to Jefferson attending or participating in Mason? There's no record of it. There's only one. And here's even... Now, to Boyden's credit, which I appreciate, he says, well, here's the definitive proof, but it's not really that great. This is after he's president. He attends a cornerstone laying for a university in Virginia. He is there with the other presidents. He is there with the surviving members of, the founding fathers, etc. And so the way the secretary wrote it was the lodge opened, right? It opened to conduct its procession. They formed a procession. They went, they laid the cornerstone. Then they all returned to the lodge hall, and then they closed. So Boyden and all these other people are like, well, the secretary wrote that they all returned to the lodge hall, and then they closed it down. So it's like, okay, so basically the secretary forgot to say, or write, all the Masons returned to the lodge hall.
So Thomas Jefferson, definitively not a Mason.
Not a lot of evidence. Without any evidence, I'm not going to call it.
I have spoken personally to the man who's the head of the museum dedicated to the other president that a lot of people want to include as a Mason, but just no proof, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln allegedly planned on petitioning a lodge and either withdrew his petition or did not feel like it was appropriate to petition as he was getting an election at the time. And it was this is about the time that he was running against Stephen Douglas and the Lincoln-Douglas debates were going on. And there's no proof of any of that. It's conjecture.
Right.
And I have spoken to the head of that museum, and he said, it sounds plausible, it sounds reasonable, but we don't have any evidence of it. So Lincoln, what is his? You mentioned earlier that he had a Knight Templar escort at the White House.
Yeah.
What else?
The Knights Templar escort is brought to you by Benjamin B. French, right? So we had a whole video on who Benjamin B. French was. By virtue of Benjamin B. French being a part of his inner circle at the White House as a commissioner of public buildings, French didn't push him, but you can tell French was interested. So in a letter to I think it's correct here, is the past Grand Master of New York writes to French after Lincoln's dead. It says, what was going on? Was he ever interested in Freemasonry? And in the letter, Benjamin French writes, he had a conversation with Lincoln at one point that basically said he would be interested in doing it. And by the way, the full extract is in the book, so you can just read it in the book. That he said that he would do it, or he would consider it after his administration. So would he have done it? Likely, I think I'm more of the opinion that he would have. He had such a good relationship with Benjamin B. French. There was a lot going on there, and I think he would have been a Mason after the administration, and he had a really good relationship with French to enable him to do that.
I'm curious as to, do you have a favorite president and then a favorite Masonic president? Are they the same? Are they different?
Truman.
And let's just, for the sake of not being boring, let's take Washington off the plate.
I don't consider Washington to be my favorite.
No, okay.
I think if you're going to rate these like it's a sports.
I mean, who's your Mount Rushmore?
Top tier. Mount Rushmore, Teddy Roosevelt. I think I really like Teddy Roosevelt, not because he was a super duper Mason, but he was one of these individuals that just like read every book.
Oh yeah.
He just attacked
He was a
everything.
character.
He was just so smart and just like, I'm going to go off and do this. Like, oh, the Rough Riders are going to ride again. Like, you are a president. Why are you bringing your guns out? Like, like these kinds of things.
You're not supposed to be storming up the hill here.
He created these myths. And in fact, the myth about Teddy Roosevelt attending a lodge where his gardener was the master and he was sitting there, well, they did some research on it, and that's not actually true. But it was just this Teddy Roosevelt, of course I did. Look at me. I was at a lodge. I attended. The way that they just figured it out was he could not have attended that meeting because that year when he was president, that guy was not the master. So his claim that he was the master that year, Anyway, but that's Teddy Roosevelt, right? He was just like, I'm going to get into this. Of course, look how humble I am. I'm the president of the United States, and my lonely gardener, my humble, gardener is sitting as the worshipful master. He just had this like power for life. He also did a lot of public activities in DC with the Masons. He laid a couple cornerstones. He was very active. And the day he left office, or either the day or the day after, and it's written in the book, he gave the Grand Master of DC like this umbrella hanger, but that was like from a foot of an elephant that he got while on safari. Like they cut off the foot and they carved it into an umbrella holder. And he was like, this is my gift for you. Thank you for, gee whiz, thanks for the Masons for doing everything. And I'm like, that's Teddy Roosevelt.
Right. So there's
Mount Rushmore,
Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Andrew Johnson, not for his policies, but for how he just was like, I'm open and interested in Freemasonry. He was the first president to be initiated into the Scottish Rite in the White House. He was the first to walk in a procession as the president of the United States to lay a cornerstone. We know that George Washington, we actually don't have proof that we know that Washington laid the cornerstone, but
we don't know he marched.
We don't know he marched. Well, I don't think he did, but Johnson went out of his way, no, I'm not interested in taking a carriage. I want to march with the Master Masons. I'm a Master Mason. Tell me where the Master Mason section is. I'm going to march with them. And so that's the Benjamin B. French says the procession took 3 hours. So imagine the president of the United States was like, no, I'm good. Yeah, I'll march with the Master Masons for 3 hours. Okay, cool. Did not ask to be, did not ask to speak. When asked, would you like to? It was like, I'm good. This is your event. I'm just here as a Master Mason. I mean, Truman. You can't.
Truman's top of my list.
Truman, you can't beat Truman. I mean, he was the Masonic president. The thing about Truman that no one else got was Truman saw the fraternity as a organization to do good and used it as that. He rallied everyone around the MSA. He tried to get support for the European Relief Fund.
It's the Masonic Service Association.
Right. And at the time, the MSA created this European Relief Fund to help people out in out in war-torn Europe. And so he knew the power of the fraternity. He was able to mobilize the power of the fraternity and use it towards public good. And no other president was able to do that.
Well, I'm excited to read the book. I'm excited for you as your brother. And how do people get the book? When can we expect to have it in our hands? The minute I saw you post a link with the pre-order, I bought it that day. So
awesome.
Mine will be in the mail here shortly. When can we expect it, and where do people get it?
So McCoy, we're publishing this through McCoy.
Great group.
Yes,
love
absolutely.
the folks at McCoy.
And you can find it online. I'm sure we can share a link to this video.
We will drop a link below
Yep.
above. That's easy. That is Scottish Rite Mason and author.
Oh, stop it.
Look, he's got a coat on now, he's trying to dress.
Well, I'm not, I'm actually hiding. It's really just hiding all the food I've been eating.
Oh, yes. Bro. Why do you think I'm wearing a black shirt?
Yeah, that's right.
That is Brother Chris Ruli, 32nd degree, KCCH, Scottish Rite Mason, historian, and now author. Information about the book is below and above. We're going to do a couple more videos to have some fun with this, the presidential trivia aspect of it, if you will, and hope you'll enjoy those. And as always, please make sure you give us a thumbs up, subscribe, share the video, and brothers and friends, drop comments below. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching. You're still here? Well, while you're here, I want you to know about the Lost Media Archive. If you click right there, you'll learn about how for $2 a month, you can help us preserve Masonic media from the 20th century. If you want to subscribe to the channel, don't forget, click right there to do it. And to watch another great Masonic video, click right there.